And together in one voice, we say, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
You know, I always confuse myself with this. You would think that a little switch that says mute on one side would be pretty simple to figure out. Oh, we all have struggles in life, I guess, don't we? Mine happens to be a mute switch. Anyway, it was funny to me. Oh, goodness. So, at about the year 6 AD, just within 10 years after Jesus' birth, there was a move that took place in ancient Palestine. In fact, it was a move that was procedural in some ways. In other ways, it had this incredibly important significance. You see, a city had been built right on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. This city had been purpose-built to be the capital city, kind of like Washington, D.C. It was purpose-built. So, too, was this little city of Caesarea. In fact, just like Washington, D.C., Caesarea actually carried with it the name of Rome's king, Caesar. Caesarea, at the time it was built, it was the largest seaport in the Roman Empire. It was this incredibly important spot that sat right on on what would be the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea. If you were in Caesarea, what you would be able to see is watch as the sun set down over the Mediterranean Sea in the west every night. The cool breezes of the Mediterranean would help to cool the city. In fact, these massive aqueducts were built to bring fresh water in because salt water is not very good for drinking. Caesarea was the crown jewel of Palestine. And as such, Caesarea, right there on the water, became the capital of Judea, the capital city, the place where the Roman governors stayed. In fact, it was the best of everything. It had the theaters. It had all the best of the Greek and Roman world had to offer. It was right there, and that's where a person like Pontius Pilate or one of the Roman governors, that's where they stayed. In fact, they'd stay there almost all year, except for a few weeks. There was this crazy little thing that happened a few weeks a year. Up in the hills, way far away from Jerusalem, far away from Caesarea, a place where Rome didn't even bother to build a road, was this city that to the Jews mattered a great deal. You may have heard of it. It's called Jerusalem. And every year, this small city, for some of us, it feels like a big city, about 50,000 or so people. Every year, it would swell to, by some estimates, over 250,000 people would show up to Jerusalem. You see, they were celebrating this weekend called Passover, this festival, this moment when God reminded the people and commanded them to celebrate. In fact, isn't it great that God tells us to celebrate? That's kind of fun, right? I mean, like God told the Jews, he said, look, I want you to celebrate every year. I want you to celebrate a multitude of special days, but this one particular day called Passover, you're supposed to celebrate it. It's a party. And what's going to happen is you're going to have special things to eat, and you're going to have special things to read, and you're going to remember the fact that there was a point in your history, a point thousands of years ago where you were slaves. You were in Egypt. Your forefathers were there, and they've been slaves for generations. And you cried out to me, and when you cried out to me, I showed up, and I turned the world upside down. If you want some fun reading sometime, just go back to Exodus, read the story of God moving in Egypt and how God brought the people out of slavery. And people who had never known freedom were finally going to get a taste of freedom. And Egypt, one of the most powerful nations in the entire world at that point, they were brought to their knees. What God did in that time of Passover, in that time of Exodus, when God pulled the people out of slavery, he literally went through and attacked these different Egyptian gods. He showed the people that he was more powerful. In fact, it was maybe the only time in history where a people group was removed from slavery and then their captors paid them to leave. It's an incredible story. Time when God literally turned the world upside down. And then what God said to Moses was, every year, you're going to stop. You're going to celebrate. Every year, you're going to have a festival. You're going to have a special meal. You're going to have all these things to remind you and to remind all the people what I did, that I'm the God who answers when you're enslaved. Now, thousands of years later, Pilate is sitting in Caesarea. Pilate's enjoying the beautiful breeze off the Mediterranean. Pilate's watching the sunset. And Pilate sits there and likely thinks a lot of bad words that I'm not allowed to say. And says, now I have to go up to Jerusalem. I got to leave the coast. I got to leave the beach. And I got to head up way into the mountains to a town that nobody cares about. And the only reason I have to go up there is because there's a bunch of Jews who believe that thousands of years ago God set them free. And God's going to do it again. And so Pilate does what Pilate always does and what every person in power would do, and frankly, what you and I would do if we were in his shoes. Every Roman governor did the same thing. From the beaches of Caesarea, they would assemble thousands of troops. They would get them all dressed in all the military hardware. They would start marching up the roads that Rome didn't build. They would march up to Jerusalem. They would go from the coast up to the mountaintop of Jerusalem. And as they marched in, they would have all the pomp and circumstance. They would have every single piece of armor was gleaming. They had to remind the Jews who was boss, because if you have a bunch of people that are getting together to talk about freedom and how God's going to set you free, it's good to remind them that they aren't in charge, that you are. And so up come the tanks. I think they had those. And up come the tanks. It's a big military parade, right? And all the Hummers and everything are coming up there, and Pilate's right there in the middle of the procession, and everyone's watching him. And what they're doing is they're showing the Jews who's boss. And if you have 250,000 Jews in Jerusalem, you better have a lot of soldiers. And so every year around Passover, Pilate would leave his little cushy seaside palace, and he would march up to Jerusalem, and he was in a bad mood anyway. But this Passover is different. See, as Pilate marched up from the west toward Jerusalem, as Pilate walked in with all of the soldiers and all of the armor and everything gleaming, and you could hear the armor as they marched in rhythm and all those things, as he's marching in, and as the Jews are watching this, something's happening on the east side of Jerusalem. On the east side, Temple Mount. And right outside the temple is this valley. It's called the Kidron Valley. On the other side of the Kidron Valley is a hill. It's called the Mount of Olives. Way over there, Jesus is standing there, and he begins to go down into the valley. There's a single road. We know what road it was. It still exists today. There's a single road that weaves its way down the Mount of Olives and then goes back up and weaves its way back up into the Temple Mount. We know what road it is. In fact, for years, they knew what road it was. For years, the prophets prophesied that the Messiah is going to go down this hill, into the valley, and up this mountain. They knew what road it was. And in fact, not only did they know what road it was, but the promise was that God, just like God delivered them from Egypt thousands of years ago, God would deliver them again, which is a wonderful promise. And so when the people When the Jews, when they felt oppressed, when they had someone kind of thumbing their back, they would cry out and say, God, bring the Messiah now. For decades, they've been crying out, God, get rid of Caesar. Get rid of him. End the suffering now. The prophecies had been there for hundreds and thousands of years, and so the faithful would put tombs right along the side of the road. Jesus, on Palm Sunday, walked through a graveyard, which is kind of how you want to celebrate, I think. Jesus is walking down or riding down the Mount of Olives on a donkey. He's passing the graveyard. There's graves as far as you can see. And as there's graves as far as you can see, pretty soon people, they start grabbing their palm branches and they start waving them. This sign of trust and faith in the Messiah, this sign that they believe that he is the Messiah. And they take their cloaks and they put them on the road. And the donkey's riding and people are cheering and people are with Jesus. And all of a sudden, this crowd, it started off as a small crowd and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger as more and more people fall in line and cheer and yell and scream. And on the west side, there's Pilate. And on the east side, there's Jesus. And they're coming up together. And Jerusalem becomes the meeting point for an army of Rome, and for an army is the wrong word, but for a crowd of people crying Hosanna and believing that God has sent a Savior. Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19, we're right in verse 40. I'm going to back up just a little bit here. To paint the scene, remember, Jesus is on the donkey. He's riding down. And as he's riding through that graveyard, all the people are screaming out, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven, glory in the highest." And then you have some Pharisees that are there because they say, "God, please help us, save us, because this is a problem. These people are being really noisy." And Pilate's up there with a bunch of soldiers. "Jesus, just tell them to be quiet." And Jesus looks around and goes, "Oh, my friends, you don't get it. If they don't yell, the tombs will break open and yell. They keep quiet, the stones will even cry out." And he's approached Jerusalem. He saw the city. And he wept. He said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it's hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you, encircle you, hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, your children within your walls. They will not leave one stone another, because you did not recognize the time of the Lord's coming to you." As he rode into Jerusalem, Jesus fulfilled every prophecy. There was a calling card, if you will. There was a bunch of prophecies about what it would be like when the Messiah came. And Jesus just goes through and is literally checking the box on every single one. He walks in the steps that the prophet said he would walk in. He rides a donkey just like they said he would. He does everything he is supposed to do. And as the people fall in line behind him, they begin to cry out, and they rightly get it. They rightly understand this is the Messiah. They get all that. They get it all right. They know who he is, and they know why he's there. They get those things. You can hear it in their cries. They're screaming out, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And the unspoken part is, there's a bunch of Romans up there, go kill them. That's what Peter thought. A few days later, he's going to pull out a sword and start trying to go to town. The people are going crazy, and they're screaming, and they're waving their palm branches. And this is the moment, and they've waited their entire lives, and in fact, their grandparents' lives and their great-grandparents' lives, they've been waiting and waiting and waiting for this moment when God one more time is going to come in, and he's going to take care of the oppressor. He's going to take care of the Romans. He's going to get rid of them. There's going to be a trail of Roman armor being thrown off as they race away because God is there to fix it. It's going to be beautiful. And they're so excited. And they're so passionate. And they are ready to get behind Jesus as Jesus is going to drive Pilate back to Caesarea and then put him on a boat and send him back to Rome and then chase him down and maybe send an aircraft carrier after him because that's what Messiah does. And Pilate's soldiers are in Jerusalem, and Jesus is walking up toward Jerusalem, and then he stops. He stops and he cries. He says, if you had only known what would bring you peace. He cries not because the people aren't excited. They are. He's not crying because the people aren't with him. They're right there. He's not crying because nobody believes him. They all believe him. It's not those things that make him cry. What makes Jesus cry in that moment as he is there in the graveyard, as he's looking up toward the temple, he cries because he realizes and he understands that they are passionate. They're just passionately wrong. You know what's possible, my friends? It is possible to be passionate. It's possible to be passionate, to believe. In fact, you can believe a lot of the right things. You can believe Jesus is the Messiah. It is possible to be passionate, to be incredibly passionate, but to be passionately wrong. In that moment, what Jesus understands is simply this, that all their passion is just off. It's off by about a degree. And that passion that's misplaced by just a little bit, that passion, it's going to cause them more pain than they can possibly imagine. See, it occurs to me that passion is good, but it's not as important as perspective. It's good to be passionate. Passion matters. But being able to see clearly is more important. In those moments, what was happening is you had a group of people, a crowd, a multitude who was screaming out for Jesus. They were so excited. They were crying out. They were sitting waving palm branches. They knew exactly who he was. They understood exactly who he was. They believed he was the Messiah. They believed so many right things. The problem is what they were thinking in their minds was, God, come and be king. Jesus, come and be king. Be the Messiah. But I want you to form your kingdom according to the blueprint I have in my mind. I want you to be the king, but I want you to be the king on my terms. I want you to be the king who kills Caesar. I want you to be the king who gets rid of the Romans. I want you to be the king who is going to set up and run a kingdom the way that I want you to. I want you to be king. I just want you to be the king of the kingdom that's in my mind. And Jesus cries and goes, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work that way. Jesus will be king, but Jesus will be king on Jesus's terms. It's almost as if when Jesus stops, he cries and he's just sitting there going, I just wish you would get it. And all they want to do is point him to Rome, point him toward Caesar, point him toward Pilate. They want to point him toward the Roman soldiers and turn him loose. And say, the kingdom we want is the kingdom that we can understand and that we can control. And then they find themselves hurting and broken, just as Jesus said they would be. It's not that Jesus didn't do what Jesus intended to do. Jesus did everything God wanted him to do. The problem is that the people who got the chance to welcome him into town, that Palm Sunday, the people who got the chance to walk with him in Jerusalem, they were passionate about Jesus doing their will instead of being passionate about doing his will. My friends, those sometimes are close, but there is a world of difference between them. I was thinking about Palm Sunday, and I was thinking about that collision in Jerusalem. Pilate coming up and Jesus coming up. Their lives are going to intertwine in ways that we still talk about 2,000 years later. I was thinking about that, and this thought crossed my mind. Do you realize that Jerusalem, Palm Sunday in Jerusalem, is a historic reality? It happened. We can point to the time. We can pretty close get to the exact day. We're pretty close on that. We get this stuff. It's a historic reality, but although it's a historic reality, it's also a reality that happens in each and every one of our lives. Did you know that? Palm Sunday in Jerusalem is not simply an event that happened 2,000 years ago. Palm Sunday in Jerusalem, it happens over and over and over and over again in my life, in my heart. And if I may be so bold, in yours. Over and over and over again. Because over and over again, we are confronted with the exact same question that the people were confronted with 2,000 years ago. The question is not, is Jesus king? That's not the question. The question is not, is Jesus king? The question is not, does he have authority? The question is not, is he powerful? The question is not, is he worthy? It's none of those things. The question of Palm Sunday in Jerusalem is not, is Jesus king? Rather, the question is, whose kingdom? That's the question. Do I want my kingdom, or do I want to be part of his? Do I want Jesus to do the work of Jesus in the way that Jesus wants it done? Do I want to allow Jesus to actually be the king on his own terms? Or do I want to try to take Jesus as king and say, you can be king as long as I get to choose how you do it? You ever, don't raise your hand, but you ever caught yourself doing that? Jesus, here's the problem, and this is the way you better fix it, doggone it. We wouldn't be so bold to pray like that, would we? We would probably pray something more like, Jesus, look, I just, here's the problem, and here's how it really should be fixed. And if you just would, I think this is the way. If you just listen to me, Jesus, if you just do what I want you to do, it would look this way, and I really think this is what you want to do. And we can go on like this for a couple days, weeks. Maybe some of us, if we're so bold, we might go on like this for months or years. God, this is how I want, this is how you're supposed to fix it. This is what it's supposed to look like. Here's the problem. This is, God, look, I have a plan for my life, and you better just you better work your magic so that you can make sure that I get the plan I want for my life. Does this sound familiar, by the way? And Jesus, I think a lot of times, sits there on the donkey and looks at us and weeps. And says that same thing. If you only knew what would bring you peace. Peace doesn't come from God working the way that I want God to work. Did you know that? Peace doesn't come from me being passionately wrong. That's not where peace comes from. Peace doesn't come when Jesus sits on the throne of the kingdom and does what I want him to do. That's not where peace comes from. Peace comes when I am willing to allow Jesus to be king on his own terms. That's where peace comes from. Peace comes when I am willing to say, Jesus, I don't know what you're doing, and I want you to kill some doggone Romans, but whatever you think, I'm with you on it. That's where peace comes from. Peace comes from me being willing to let go of my dreams and my desires and my list of to-dos for God. And when I just say, God, I'm done with my to-do list, your to-do list. I'm done with that. You just do whatever you want to with that. I'm just going to trust you. Peace comes when I recognize that he is king and I am not. That's where peace comes from. In fact, if I can be so bold, salvation comes when I'm willing to recognize that he is king and that I am not. When I'm willing to recognize that his perspective is more important than my perspective. That's where it comes from. And my friends, what happens, I think, so often is we fail to realize that Jerusalem is playing out in our own hearts all the time. Palm Sunday in Jerusalem is not simply a historic event. It is something that is happening here. Over and over and over again. Every time I go to God and say, this is how you should fix it. My friends, that's Palm Sunday. Every time I'm tempted to say, no, Jesus, don't answer it that way, answer it my way. That's Palm Sunday happening all over again. Every time I see a problem and I go, God, this is how you better do. It's Palm Sunday happening all over again. Every time I get in my mind the way that God has to work and it's rigid and inflexible and unmoving, it's Palm Sunday happening all over again. Every time that I'm tempted to say, God, this is how you must rule the world. It's Palm Sunday all over again. And in those moments where I'm determined that Jesus has to do it my way, I become one of those people that wave palm branches, and then a few days later, cry to have him crucified. every time that I demand my way, all I am is someone who's waving palm branches. We're going to cry out for his death. It's not that palm branches are bad, my friends. They're not bad. Honestly, the palm branches can be a good thing as long as we recognize that it's his kingdom and not ours. There's this great picture in Revelation where the author John writes about Jesus coming into the throne room of God. And everyone starts crying out, who's worthy? Pretty soon the song picks up that Jesus is worthy. He is the only one who is worthy. Here's the thing, my friends. The scripture tells us there is one person, there is one God who is worthy to be king on his own terms, and that's Jesus. I don't get to be king of the universe. I don't want the title. And if I may be so bold, neither do you. You're all wonderful and special. Your mom was right. But none of you are fit to be king of the universe or queen of the universe. None of us are. There's one person that throne is reserved for. It's not me and it's not you. And I wonder how many times we go through life and we are passionate and we are convinced and we are so focused and we go, Jesus, fix it this way. Do what I want you to do. Be king, but do it my way. And Jesus sits there and cries for us and goes, you don't understand. Peace and salvation and hope, it comes one way. When on the throne of our lives, Jesus sits there all by himself. The lesson of Palm Sunday. The lesson of Palm Sunday is not the need to wave palm branches more fervently. The lesson of Palm Sunday. The lesson of Palm Sunday is that we must be willing to lay them down and to accept our King on his terms and his terms alone. It's his kingdom, not ours. When you came in, a lot of you got these palm branches. It's a wonderful tradition to wave palm branches, to sing and shout Hosanna. It's a good thing, and I'm not critiquing that at all. But sometimes, my friends, what we really need to do is recognize that there are times that in all our waving of palm branches, what we're really saying is, God, be king on my terms. The palm branch is actually, it was on the back of the last coin of the Jewish kingdom before Jesus. When they waved palm branches, what they were saying is, God, bring us back our kingdom. Let us have our way. And sometimes the most holy thing we can do is lay him down.